My name is Sophia, and this is the kind of story people usually scroll past until they see the word revenge. But before that part comes, you need to understand where I started. I grew up in a forgotten, rural town in the United States. One of those places where poverty isn't dramatic, it's quiet, constant, and exhausting. The kind of place where kids learn early how to hide hunger and adults learn how to smile through unpaid bills. My parents worked as hard as their bodies allowed, but hard work doesn't always mean enough money. By the time I turned 12 and entered 8th grade, I already understood that dreams were expensive. School supplies felt like luxuries, new clothes were myths, and college was a word people like us didn't say out loud. Still, I loved learning. I loved books because they didn't care how poor you were. They only asked if you were willing to read. When my parents admitted they couldn't afford to keep me in school much longer, I made a choice that most kids my age never have to make. During the day, I went to school with a borrowed backpack and worn-out shoes. In the evenings, I worked. A wealthy family on the other side of town hired me to help around their house washing clothes, cleaning rooms, cooking meals, and fixing whatever small problems their perfect lives didn't have time for. Their house had air conditioning in every room while ours barely had heat. I was 12, standing on tiptoes to reach sinks built for people who never struggled. I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to. Every night I came home exhausted, hands smelling of detergent and spices, mind still filled with math problems and essays due the next morning. I studied under dim lights while my parents slept, telling myself that this was temporary, that poverty was not my identity, just my starting point. As the years passed, I grew older, stronger, and more determined. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became manageable. I learned discipline before I learned freedom. I learned humility before confidence. I didn't know then that one day, humiliation would find me again in that same house. But this time, it would light a fire instead of breaking me. That moment would change everything. By the time I turned 18, my life had settled into a fragile routine. I was still working evenings at the same house, still studying during the day, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer just surviving, I was planning. I had learned how to stretch a dollar, how to stay invisible when needed, and how to listen. People underestimate poor girls, and that underestimation became my secret weapon. I listened when adults talked business at the dinner table, when they complained about taxes, investments, and opportunities. They never realized the quiet girl folding laundry was absorbing everything. Then one summer evening, everything cracked. The family's son returned home after years abroad in London. He walked into the house like the world owed him respect designer clothes, polished accent, and eyes full of entitlement. The first time he saw me, his gaze didn't even try to hide its disgust. He looked at my simple clothes, my tired posture, and laughed. "Why do we have poor people roaming around our house?" he said loudly, like I wasn't even human. His words burned more than hunger ever had. I stood there frozen, holding a basket of clean clothes, feeling smaller than I had in years. Over the next few days, the insults didn't stop. He made jokes about my background, my work, my existence. Each comment was a reminder of where society thought I belonged. Eventually, his discomfort turned into inconvenience for the family, and I was quietly let go. No explanation, no apology, just a polite dismissal. Walking home that night, I cried harder than I ever had. Not because I lost the job, but because I realized how disposable I was to people like them. But pain has a strange way of sharpening focus. I took that humiliation and turned it into fuel. I poured myself into my education, applied for scholarships no one thought I'd win, and worked multiple small jobs to survive. I studied business, technology, and finance fields people like that family assumed were only for their kind. Every rejection taught me resilience. Every small win reminded me I wasn't invisible. Years passed. Slowly, steadily, my life changed. I built something of my own, an idea born from struggle, shaped by discipline and executed with relentless patience. Money followed. Respect followed. Freedom followed. I became everything they never imagined I could be. And fate, as it turns out, has an excellent sense of timing. Success didn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It came quietly, disguised as long nights, calculated risks, and the kind of loneliness no one talks about. I built my company from the ground up, starting with a laptop that overheated and a desk made from a secondhand table. I've failed more times than I can count. There were months I questioned whether leaving that house had truly changed anything. But then the contracts started coming in. Small ones at first, then bigger deals. I focused on solving real problems, especially for people who came from places like mine. I hired talent others ignored. I've paid fair wages. I built a culture rooted in dignity, because I knew what it felt like to be treated as less than human. One morning, years later, I walked into my office, a glass building overlooking the city, and realized I was no longer afraid of bills, hunger, or being dismissed. I was free. My name was now associated with influence and leadership. Investors wanted meetings. Media outlets requested interviews. The same society that once looked through me now wanted to hear my story. I didn't feel pride the way I thought I would. I felt calm, like I had finally caught up with myself. That's when life circled back. My HR manager brought me a resume during a hiring round. I glanced at the name and froze. It was him, the same boy who once laughed at my existence. His resume was impressive on paper, but life had clearly humbled him. He needed the job. He needed stability. And now, without realizing it, he was applying to work under me. The irony was almost poetic. When he walked into the interview room, he didn't recognize me at first. Power changes how people see you. My clothes were tailored, my posture confident, my presence undeniable. Then our eyes met and I saw it, the flicker of recognition, followed by discomfort. He stumbled through his answers, suddenly careful with his words. I listened patiently, not with anger but with clarity. At the end of the interview I spoke. I reminded him calmly of a time when he asked why poor people were allowed in his house. I told him that poverty is not a defect, and wealth is not a virtue, it's a circumstance. I explained that every human body is the same, built of the same bones and blood, regardless of money. The room was silent. He nodded, ashamed. I didn't need revenge. Life had already taught the lesson. I offered him the job, not out of pity and not to humiliate him, but to complete a lesson that life had started years ago. Power used only for revenge is still weakness. Power used with principle is freedom. He accepted, his voice low, eyes never fully meeting mine. From that day on, the dynamic was clear. I wasn't his boss because I was rich. I was his boss because I had earned it through discipline, resilience, and an understanding of people that money alone could never buy. Watching him adjust was strange. He worked hard, followed rules, and slowly unlearned the arrogance that once defined him. Occasionally, I caught him looking at me with confusion, maybe even respect, but I never allowed him or anyone to forget the values this company stood on. We treated janitors and executives the same. Titles didn't define worth. Effort did. Integrity did. Humanity did. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that 12-year-old girl washing dishes in a house that never felt like hers. I wished I could tell her that survival would turn into strategy, that humiliation would become education. I wished I could tell her that poverty was not a permanent label. It was a chapter, but life doesn't let you skip pages. You have to live through every line. People often ask me how it feels to win. I tell them, winning isn't becoming rich, it's becoming untouchable by disrespect. It's knowing your value so deeply that no insult can rewrite it. Money didn't change my humanity. It amplified it. I still see myself in every struggling student, every overworked single parent, every invisible worker holding society together quietly. One day, during a company meeting, I shared my story publicly for the first time. I watched faces change, shock, admiration, reflection. I reminded them that poverty is not a lack of character, and wealth is not proof of intelligence. We are all built the same way. Same bones, same organs, same capacity for kindness and cruelty. The only difference is opportunity, and even that can be created. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Never look down on someone just because they're climbing from a lower place. One day, they might be standing above you not to push you down, but to show you how to stand taller. As my company grew, so did my responsibility not just to shareholders or clients, but to the story I represented. I knew that success gave me a microphone, whether I asked for it or not. People listened when I spoke, and that meant my words had weight. I started mentoring students from low-income backgrounds, especially girls who reminded me of myself quiet, capable, and constantly underestimated. I told them the truth no one had told me, that the world isn't fair, but it is negotiable. You can push back. You can rewrite expectations. You can demand space without apology. The man who once mocked my poverty worked under me for 2 years. During that time, he changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but genuinely. One evening after a long project deadline, he stayed behind and thanked me not for the job, but for the dignity. He said no one had ever challenged his worldview without bitterness. I accepted his apology without ceremony. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about releasing yourself from carrying someone else's ignorance. I used my resources to create scholarships, paid internships, and fair hiring practices. I made it policy that no one in my company would be judged by their accent, address, or clothes. I remembered how it felt to be invisible, and I refused to let my success erase that memory. Wealth can numb empathy if you let it. I didn't. Sometimes I returned to my hometown, not as a savior, not as proof, but as a reminder. I walk past the schools that shaped me and the streets that hardened me. I visit my parents' old house and sit quietly, grateful. Everything I am was built there between sacrifice and hope. If you're listening to this and you come from nothing, hear me clearly. Nothing is not where you'll stay. And if you come from privilege, remember this money doesn't make you superior. It just makes life quieter. Strip it away, and we are all the same fragile, determined humans trying to matter. This isn't just a revenge story. It's a human one, and my name is Sophia. There was a season after that when I thought I had finally outrun my past. But the truth is, your roots always whisper to you, especially in quiet moments. Success brought comfort, but it also brought distance from people who didn't understand how heavy the climb had been. I attended conferences where people talked about grit like it was a trendy word, not something you earned through hunger and fear. I smiled politely, but inside, I remembered nights when grit meant choosing between sleep and studying, dignity and survival. I realized then that my story wasn't finished just because I had money. It was finished only if I stopped telling the truth. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a national leadership summit. The room was full of executives, policymakers, and influencers, people who shaped narratives. Standing at that podium, I didn't talk about profit margins or growth strategies. I talked about cleaning floors in a house where I wasn't allowed to sit on the couch. I talked about being 12 years old and learning responsibility before childhood. The room went silent. Some people looked uncomfortable. Good. Comfort had never changed the world. After the speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said she worked 2 jobs to pay tuition and felt ashamed of her exhaustion. I held her hands and told her something I wish someone had told me. You are not behind. You are ahead in ways you don't see yet. In that moment, I understood my real success wasn't measured in net worth, but in impact. That night, alone in my hotel room, I reflected on the boy from that house, the job, the insults. If he hadn't looked down on me, would I have burned this fiercely? Maybe, maybe not. Pain doesn't create strength, but it reveals it. And mine had been there all along, waiting. I stopped asking why life was unfair and started asking how I could make it more honest. Honest about effort. Honest about opportunity. Honest about the lie that poor and rich are different species. We aren't. Strip us down to bone and breath, and no one can tell who grew up hungry and who grew up spoiled. I promised myself then I would never let the world forget that truth, not while I still had a voice. As the years continued, my life settled into something that looked stable from the outside, but inside I was still evolving. Healing, I learned, is not a finish line, it's a practice. There were moments when old insecurities tried to resurface, especially in rooms filled with generational wealth and casual confidence. But I no longer shrank. I reminded myself that I had earned every seat I occupied, not through inheritance, not through favors, but through persistence that never asked permission. I began investing in communities others overlook, small towns, underfunded schools, local businesses run by people with raw talent and no safety net. I didn't see it as charity. I saw it as justice. Opportunity had been hoarded for too long by those who mistook luck for superiority. Every project I funded carried one rule: treat people with dignity, or lose my support. Money can be a weapon or a bridge. I chose the bridge. One day, my company faced a public crisis. A major deal fell apart, and critics were quick to question my leadership. Headlines hinted that I was overconfident, emotional, or too idealistic. I recognized the language. It was the same tone used to silence poor girls and ambitious women. This time, instead of breaking, I stood firm. I addressed the issue transparently, took responsibility, and moved forward. The company recovered stronger. Respect followed honesty. Through it all, I kept returning to one core belief: no one is self-made. We are all shaped by unseen hands: teachers, parents, strangers, even enemies. The boy who once insulted me unknowingly became one of those hands, not because he helped me, but because he showed me exactly who I never wanted to become. If this story reaches you on a late night, scrolling for distraction, I hope it leaves you with something heavier than entertainment. I hope it leaves you with awareness. Look twice at the people serving you, cleaning around you, standing quietly in corners. You don't know how powerful they are becoming. My journey didn't begin with privilege, but it didn't end in bitterness either. It ended in clarity, and clarity is the most dangerous kind of power. But my life had become a balance between authority and humility. I had money, influence, and recognition, yet every morning, I reminded myself of the 12-year-old girl folding someone else's laundry with aching arms and a quiet heart full of hope. I realized that the more you climb, the more visible your choices become. Every act of cruelty or compassion echoes farther than you imagine. I chose to make mine count. The boy from that house, now my subordinate, had learned lessons he didn't expect. He treated coworkers with respect, listened more than he spoke, and occasionally asked for guidance. I didn't boast about how the tables had turned. I simply did my work, and the balance of justice played itself out naturally. He understood, slowly, that humility is a currency no one can take away. It's more valuable than money, fame, or legacy. I also began telling my story publicly, not for attention, but to remind the world of the invisible struggle happening every day. People wanted dramatic rags to riches Talese, but I shared the truth, grinding silently, facing insults, navigating inequality, and choosing persistence over surrender. I wanted young women, especially, to see that success isn't only about talent or luck. It's about refusing to internalize the world's disrespect. There were nights I still doubted myself, when the weight of expectations pressed down. But I realized doubt is a companion to growth, not a sign of weakness. Every sleepless night, every difficult decision, and every uncomfortable conversation had built a foundation, stronger than any paycheck. I had become unshakable, not because the world had changed, but because I had, and in that realization, I found peace. The past no longer haunted me. It educated me. The boy who once mocked me, the house I worked in, the long hours and aching limbs, all of it became part of my strength, not my shame. I carried every lesson forward, and I carried them with grace. Looking back now, it all feels like a series of carefully laid bricks, each hardship a foundation for the woman I became. I remember walking through that small, dusty town where I grew up, the same streets that once felt like walls closing in on me. I see the kids playing, the neighbors chatting on porches, And I remember that little girl with dirty hands, tired eyes, and dreams bigger than her circumstances. I feel a mixture of gratitude and gratitude that I survived, and anger that so many are still trapped in cycles I had to fight to escape. But that anger has never been wasted. It became energy, focus, and a blueprint for change. I've built more than wealth. I've built purpose. I built systems to support people who are invisible in the eyes of society, to make sure they have a ladder I never had to imagine. I want them to know that starting poor does not mean staying poor, and that dignity is not reserved for those with fancy suits or Ivy League degrees. The boy from that house, my former tormentor, remained under my leadership. For several years, he never apologized publicly for what he had said when he was young, and I never demanded it. Words are powerful, but action speaks louder. I watched him learn humility, empathy, and responsibility. It was almost poetic. The same arrogance that once threatened to crush me now became his greatest teacher. I saw that my revenge had never been personal. It was a quiet, unyielding demonstration of capability, discipline, and resilience. Life had delivered justice without malice, simply by allowing me to rise while he remained under the framework I had built. He became competent, but he never forgot the unspoken lesson. People who are underestimated can one day surpass those who look down on them. I often tell my story to audiences across the country, not as a tale of wealth or fame, but as proof of human resilience. I emphasize that no person is inferior because of their circumstances. Poverty is temporary. Entitlement is fleeting. True value exists in perseverance, empathy, and integrity. I speak to young women, immigrants, low-income students, and anyone who has felt invisible. I tell them that the world will try to label you, limit you, and diminish your voice, but you have the power to redefine your story. You are not your environment. You're your actions, your choices, and your persistence. Sometimes I pause and reflect on my parents, who gave everything they had, even if it was never enough to shield me from hardship. I dedicate my work to them and to the millions who labor quietly, unseen, holding the world together. I remind myself daily that being rich is not just about money, it's about using what you have to lift others, to create opportunity, and to demonstrate humanity. Wealth can be a bridge, a weapon, or a mirror. I chose the bridge, and every life I touch reminds me I made the right choice. And so, here I am, Sophia, a woman who started with nothing but determination, who faced humiliation and poverty, and who rose without letting bitterness define me. My story isn't about revenge, though it carries the satisfaction of justice. It's about proof that dignity is not purchased. Resilience is not inherited, and every human being, poor or rich, deserves respect. I survived, I thrived, and I became a living reminder that underestimating someone because of their beginnings is humanity's greatest mistake. And if anyone ever questions your worth, remember, your bones, your heart, your blood are no different from their sound sometimes. That is the most powerful equalizer of all.